Hi there, and welcome to the Ideas Society brought to you by Origin. This series will see us talking to creative people from a range of different backgrounds. And the hope is that we get inspired by their stories and some of their ideas about how we can live and work better in the future. Our first guest we're extremely excited to have today is Conor Brady. Conor is a Northern Irish man, but has spent most of his career in the US working on some of the biggest brands we all know. I was going to spend 30 seconds bigging him up, but I realized it was really boring having just me and the camera. So without further ado, we're going to cross the Atlantic and speak to Conor. Hope you guys enjoy it. Hello, Conor. Thanks for joining us from your retreat up there, upstate New York. How are things?
Very good. How you doing? Doing good?
We're not bad. I suppose like the rest of us, we're all in strange times.
Yeah.
How's lockdown treating you out there?
So far, it's been okay. I mean, we're about 2 hours north of the city, north of New York, up in the countryside. So it's, best at times, it's pretty isolated. So it's not much of a change of lifestyle for us up here, but we're doing okay. It's like we just moved into a new place, like we've been talking about. So the first 3 weeks were basically spent unpacking boxes. So it was actually a good use of time. But the last week or so, as we've kind of settled back to work life, it's got its challenges, but we're doing fine. We're doing okay. Yeah.
So this, I suppose we've caught you at a good time. We knew you were going to be in
the house. Knocking around, nothing to do.
You had no choice but to say yes to this.
Sure.
But I've given you the rough gist of what the Ideas Society is about. And really, you're the guinea pig. This is the pilot episode.
There you go.
We're going to be talking to people like you, interesting people from different creative walks of life. And the idea is just generally get some idea of your story, get some inspiration from that, and also discuss some concepts around how creativity, design, or ideas, or anything in that ilk can improve life and how we work.
Sounds good.
So, I suppose to kick off, I know you've had an interesting career, and you've probably got a million stories there to tell us. But in the spirit of designing within constraints, can you take us on maybe 5 or half a dozen steps from starting out in Lurgan in County Armagh right through to now?
It's a strange place to start, right, Lurgan? I mean, it's been kind of interesting, and I can't say a lot of it was planned. A lot of it kind of happens if you kind of just go with the flow a little bit. That'll probably come up a lot in the more we talk. I tend to go with my gut quite a lot and sort of go with where things lead me rather than having some grand plan to leave Lurgan and get to New York, X amount of years in the future. I mean, I was lucky when I was younger. I was very much into cycling and was very good at it and got to travel a lot very young. So even from the age of like 14, 15, 16, I was like getting on planes and boats and racing in England and racing in Europe. And so got a taste for travel very young, maybe younger than most of us growing up in Northern Ireland. Like we didn't get the opportunity to travel too far. So that gave me a taste to sort of get out there and see what was going on. And then when I hit kind of 18, 19 and was debating about whether to go down the route of an athlete in cycling or go to art college, my father convinced me. He was like, look, go to university, go to college, get qualified. And then when you come out of college, do what you want, but you'll still have something to fall back on if the cycling doesn't work out.
Right.
So it was good advice and it stood by me, and I went to college. So I did, the usual everybody did, you applied to York Street in Belfast and you applied to Dublin, and I applied to 2 or 3 colleges over in England, all of them in London. And I got accepted into college in London. So I ended up going to college in London. And even back then in my head, I was kind of like, well, maybe I'll do the foundation year here and I'll go back. And then you end up doing your degree. So I ended up doing the BA in graphic design there as well, in London. And then I ended up going to the Royal College for part of the time after that as well, and doing like an illustration course with Dan Fern with the D&AD. So the whole college time I was in London. And by that time, when you've been there maybe 4 or 5 years at that point, you kind of end up settling there. You kind of think, well, okay, this is my base to sort of figure out what I'm going to do. So that's how I got from Lurgan to London. And then when I was in London, I think I got very lucky. Right out of college, I walked into a job at Random House doing book jackets.
Yeah, so
And
that sounds great.
Yeah, literally, I met the guy that I ended up working
covers.
with. I met at my degree show. So that was my kind of end of year degree show, and I was doing a lot of illustration work, a lot of image-based work, less design work back then. And he picked up on that, and that's how I got into sort of doing book design, which I did for the guts of 6-7 years. And that led me to the music industry, working at Polygram and doing record covers. And, both of those things allowed me to sort of work outside London as well. I got to work in New York a little bit through Random House. I got to work in New York a little bit through Universal Music and Polygram as well. So that started me to sort of think, well, what's outside of London then? What else is going on that I could maybe look at? And
give you a taste for the big lights.
Yeah, just to see, I always find it. You look at those places from afar, and they can feel pretty intimidating. From a sort of like going in there cold and young, not really knowing what you're doing, to sort of like try and figure it all out was, I kind of like that, sort of going in and seeing if I can do it and figure it out. So after about maybe 10 years or 11 years doing the book jackets and the record stuff, I guess digital was really starting to happen, and the digital agencies became a thing. They weren't when I first started out. Sure. 10, 12 years in, they did. And back then it was an agency called Razorfish, who were one of the original digital agencies back in Internet 1.0 before everything went south.
I still remember them. I don't know whether that shows both our ages.
They're still around. I mean, there's a very different company now, but still around. And they actually were opening an office in London for the first time, and we're looking for people to join the London office. So I went along and met a guy called Olaf, who was their CCO at the time, and now runs the agency called Fjord.
Yeah.
Now, but Olaf back then was CCO at Razorfish. And I met him. We got on really well. And I met another guy, Thomas Mueller, who's also now at Fjord as well. Both like two people that really shaped my career a lot. Right. But it was one of the weird conversations. Like, they invited me out for lunch. We went for lunch, and lunch in London tends to be in the pub. And 4 hours later, we're still in the pub, and having one of those lunches. And I remember saying to them at the time, "Look, I'd love to work with you guys, but I don't know shit about digital. I mean, I had no knowledge at all of digital. I mean, I was doing boot jackets and record covers." And what Olaf said was, "Look, I'm looking for really good creatives. You can learn digital, but like if you've got talent, you'll figure it out." So they hired me.
I suppose at that time you had a lot of people looking at digital, and rightly.
No one really knew it
in a functional way.
Yeah, very much.
But forgetting the old-fashioned artistry of good design. I remember working in agencies where the developers were designing websites, for instance. And designers didn't even get a sniff at that. So they were ahead of the curve slightly.
Well, that was kind of Razorfish back then. It was a very technology-driven company, and I think people like Olaf and Thomas were trying to bring in like the idea of design to the company and creatives to sort of counterbalance that a little bit. So that was an interesting time. That sort of got me into Razorfish, and then they asked me right off the bat if I'd go to New York for 6 weeks. They just won the account for Ford, and it was the Ford Centennial. It was like 100 years of Ford. And they were trying to build a team to go and do all of the work for Ford Centennial. So I went over to New York for 6 weeks, and 18 and a half years later, I'm still here. Right. I just couldn't find the airport to get back. But I liked it a lot. I came for that 6 weeks. The 6 weeks turned into 6 months, and then it turned into staying for a year. And then by that point, I was pretty embedded in the New York office at Razorfish, and from there it just led on to New York became my base. I met my wife through Razorfish, so I settled there pretty quickly. And at the same time, I was kind of done with London. I'd been in London for, at that point, probably about 14 years, and was looking out one way or the other. At one point, I was thinking about moving to Amsterdam, and was just trying to figure out how do I get out of London and like take this somewhere else and do it somewhere else. So it all kind of fell in my lap a little bit with New York, and it's worked out really well.
So you're saying there that the conversation with Olaf was kind of a pivotal point. You want maybe a bit of a leap from one medium to another.
Yeah.
Is that, because I was just looking through your bio, you in the run up to this call, and you look at, it doesn't happen that much anymore where you see someone start doing book covers and then into record covers. Again, probably similarities in audience there, but then straight a jump into a totally different production environment.
Yeah.
Are you ever conscious of that? You've got to stay relevant, or I need to change, or where's your mindset on that?
I think it's maybe easier. It might be easier now because I think digital platforms, we can kind of do anything we want in a way that's kind of can get in the way sometimes, because it, sometimes a few limiters isn't a bad thing. It sort of keeps you within a box and you work within that box and produce. But back when at that Razorfish moment, I mean, digital was very raw and naive, and like you couldn't really do a lot. I mean, page size was a big limiter in what you could do, and because we didn't have broadband everywhere, it's like, so you were designed into a very restricted environment. So I went from doing like pop promo videos and like record covers and book covers where you were like commissioning photography and film and doing like, pretty high fidelity design to 256 colors and 4 fonts and JPEGs the size of a thumbnail. And, I definitely had moments where I was like, what have I done? It's like, have I just taken a massive step backwards? Because it really felt, at least from an aesthetic perspective, it was really hard. It was really hard to make something look good. Like when you were doing a book jacket or a rec cover, it was pretty easy to make something look good. It had good photography, good film, good typography, printed well, nice packaging. It's going to look good. It's hard to kind of mess it up. Digital was the opposite. It was like you were so restricted. And every time you try and do something, you had a developer saying, you can't do that. It's too big. It's too small. It's too heavy.
We were always told that if Google can do their homepage in 12 kilobytes, we should be able to do anything in 100 kilobytes.
Totally. Oh yeah, totally. And then you're also in the world of Flash back then, which was the big debate back then. Was like, who owned Flash? Was it the designer's tool or was it the developer's tool? Because I knew designers that could develop in Flash better than some developers could. So there was a whole insecurity there around the technology groups around, were they losing control of the code because the designers were kind of taking over. It was an interesting time, and I think what kept me in digital maybe and not decide to get out of it and go back to doing print work again. It changed really quickly, like within about a year and a half, 2 years. Like, we got better connectivity, so you could do better things with stuff that you passed along. We got better clients who were asking for better stuff. We weren't just doing essentially big, nicely designed PDFs and browsers. We're actually doing interactivity and motion design and starting to use film and starting to use video. So it started to feel like it was opening up. So I hung in there, and it paid off, because I think we were at that turning point where digital just became fundamental to business. Yeah. And then when you were in that world, I mean, you were able to, and you also look at some massive brands that didn't really have a good digital presence. It was like massive opportunities to go in and like work with great brands, like building their brand digitally, when they spent probably millions doing it in print and, in retail environments and everything else. So it was kind of there was obviously massive opportunity if you were at the right agency and could pitch it in the right way. There was definitely really great work to do.
I suppose that was one of the things that really jumps out at me, and it makes your mouth water really. As an agency owner, you moved to New York, opened all those doors to brands, who and the dollars that existed there, and the decision makers who were there. So, and moving through into agencies like Huge and into Critical Mass, where you worked with, the best and the best of the best in terms of customer experience and branding. I'll let you name drop wherever you like. But what did versus I'm sure some of the smaller stuff, which is equally interesting. What did work on those big brands teach you? What sort of stripes have you earned from that?
You know, it's. I mean, the brands are. What I find more interesting was the brands that had design as like a absolutely core functional part of their business. Like they really give a shit about design and expect good design. Whereas I feel like other big brands that we worked for where it wasn't, like to them it was almost like housekeeping. Like they felt like they had to do it, but they didn't particularly want to do it. They didn't particularly want to spend the money on doing it, but they did it. So you look at so I was lucky enough, one of the last things I did over the last 3 years was working with BMW.
Wow.
And, growing up, I was a massive BMW fan. And I think over the years now, I've probably touched or worked on 6 or 7 car brands, everybody from Audi to Ford to Infiniti to Nissan. I'd never worked in BMW, and it was the only brand I give a shit about.
Right.
I mean, I drive an Audi, but
Well, obviously not that much of a shit.
no. But I really loved. I actually learned to drive in a BMW. My uncle, who taught me how to drive, was a sales rep for Guinness in Dublin, and his company car was a BMW, and that's the car I learned to drive in. So I always had this like weird connection to BMW, even though I'd never owned one. I just had this like thing
and
about
not Guinness, no.
not the same time, obviously. So, and I actually told that story when we were pitching it, and I had a photograph of me the day that I got my driving license, because I did the test in that car, of me with my test, you passed thing, sitting on the bonnet of a BMW at the age of 17, I think we did our test at.
Yeah.
That was one of the things that we opened the pitch with, and it was like, it's like in our genes.
Brilliant.
The thing with BMW is like it's probably one of the best onboarding experiences I ever had was with BMW. Because we were working with BMW North America, so our client was based in New York. Now, a lot of the things that we did in the US then trickled down to all the markets around the world. So if you build a configurator here in the US, everybody uses it, even Germany. So, but the brand itself is like in Munich, at the headquarters in Germany. So the week that they told us that we'd won the account, it was like I think it was a 3-month pitch. I think we had 4 separate meetings, like 4 separate pitches, where each pitch it whittled down from 5 agencies to 4 agencies to 3 agencies to 2 to a winner. So we were like, by the time we got to the end of it, we were exhausted because all we'd done was like work on BMW for 3 months, essentially for free.
It had to pay off.
Paid off in the end, but like think of the guys that didn't get in there. It's like they put such an effort and probably quite a lot of like money and hours behind it to try and win it and didn't get it. So we were lucky once we won. And but by the end of it, we were exhausted. And then literally the day that they told us, they asked us out for a meeting, didn't tell us what the meeting was going to be. And then in the meeting, they told us that we'd won. They said, and next week we've planned for all of you. So they took, I think our team was like 12 people. They flew us all to Munich for 3 days for an onboarding. And what the onboarding at BMW means is you go to the Welt, which is the BMW headquarters in Munich. It's like the original factory. Okay. And they still, I think, 3 series and 4 series in this factory. But attached to the factory now is this amazing piece of architecture. I think it was designed by Zahid. I think it is. I can't remember, but it's an amazing, stunning building that they've built specifically as like a cathedral to BMW, and they do the brand onboarding in that. It's the most visited tourist attraction in Germany. This particular building. It's crazy. So we had 3 days of like learning the BMW brand. So just sitting in a room and having various people presentations kind of roll by us for 3 days. Everybody from the CEO of BMW globally down to like people that were like the engineer that designed the M3, or, the people that work on the interiors, or like just absolutely immersing us in the BMW brand and what it means to be what they would say, no, you're part of the BMW team. Like you really have to get the brand. At the end of that 3 days, we were certified. I'm a certified BMW brand ambassador now, because at the end of the 3 days, everybody that sat through the 3 days got sort of certified. You're sort of certified to work on the brand. That's how serious they take it.
But I suppose when you're working with a company like that, you know they're serious about what you do.
Design's everything to them. They're a design, and they wouldn't even call themselves a car brand. I mean, they really call themselves a design and engineering brand, or design and performance brand, if I use their language. But it's really an engineering brand, and it was amazing. I mean, it exceeded all expectations of anything I had for BMW. And if you didn't love BMW going into that, you definitely loved them coming out of it. But just seeing even like the shop that they had in this building where they were selling essentially BMW merchandise was just like, it was like walking into Prada. It was like insane. So they really care about design. And, then you as a designer creating something for them, it definitely makes you up your game. There's no doubt. You force yourself to be better. And I pushed the teams really hard in that account because I didn't want to be the CCO. It turned out to shit work for BMW. It's like you really want to do good work for them because they really care about it. And I think that's a good thing because that instills this sense of attention to detail, all the things that they put into the car, you're expected to bring to the thing that you deliver to them.
I suppose a little bit like Sir Alex Ferguson and what he does at Manchester United.
Totally. I mean, it's like they teach you how to push people and push the product. I mean, they tell you product stories about how a car passes through the phases of going from a life-size clay concept car, literally handcrafted out of a piece of clay, to like rolling off a production line in some factory around the world where they're building the car. Like the effort and the stages in between is incredible. And they expect you to bring that to the table as well. So they have to put the pressure up. So I've always found that I respond to that really well because like when I know I'm working with someone who gives a shit about design, then there's simpatico, like we get along.
Someone who maybe didn't respond to it as quite as well. If you're listening to this on podcast, I'm currently holding up the George Best
autobiography.
I know you're a big fan of George Best.
Well, unfortunately we're in the wrong room. I don't think they're in here. So I otherwise I would have turned the computer on to my autographed picture of George Best.
Well, funny, I was tidying my shelves behind me here just for this. You're not as curated as that normally. And this book was in there with a little George Best £5 note in there, and I thought, I know Conor used to sign his emails off inspired by George Best.
Yeah. Did I tell you the story about meeting George Best? I don't know if we ever exchanged that over.
No, I don't think so. No.
So when I was in London, one of my best friends is a guy called Trevor A. Hart. He's a photographer. He shoots for like GQ and whatever. We were like roommates at college, and I was best man at his wedding. Like we're like best mates. And I was at work one day. I think it was when I was doing book jackets. I was in Random House down in Pimlico in London. I got a phone call, and it's Trevor. And he's like, "I've got a job on this afternoon. You need to come and be my assistant." And I was like, what are you talking about? And he's like, photographing George Best. It's like, tell me where I need to be.
You're on the way out the door already.
So we went down to Fulham to like George Best's local, and we photographed him in the back room of his like local pub in Fulham, where I was like standing like completely dumbstruck in awe of like him. Sat and had a couple of beers with him and took the shots and left. That was it. It was, I mean, it was great. He was half cut because it was like 4 p.m. He'd been in there since probably 11 o'clock, betting on horses and drinking. But it's like the stories he was coming out with and talking to us. And that's where I got my autograph picture because I brought a picture with me and got him to sign it and stuff. So it's like,
maybe a genius like him, he didn't need constraints to work. He'd rather freestyle it a bit, didn't he?
Definitely freestyle. Weirdly, and then the other side of that, so like in that case of BMW, like the constraints kind of worked in our favor. There's other brands that we work with, like we did a lot of work with Marriott over the last 3, 4, 5 years, and they've gone through their own turmoil. I mean, they got bought by SPG, so now they're part of the biggest hospitality group in the world. Like they own I think almost every hotel you go to now is owned by SPG. It's kind of bizarre. Now Marriott bought SPG, so they've merged them all together. And in the industry there, they've got a term called heads on beds. And the
Okay.
only thing that they really give a shit about, and they'll tell you other things, but in reality, the only thing they really care about is getting heads on beds, like filling rooms. And every single thing that they do, whether it be marketing to social media, to redesigning the booking engine on the site, whatever you do, it's all about getting heads on beds. That's really all they care about. And they really don't care that much how it gets done. Like, as long as it's done well and done to best practices, represents the brand in the right way, like their main driver, their main metric for success is it driving leads and heads on beds?
Yeah.
And that's very different to BMW, because someone like BMW, they're like, BMWs almost sell themselves in a weird way. Like the Rondell is globally renowned as one of the most recognized logos in the world. Everybody knows who BMW is. So what are you going to tell someone that they don't already know about the brand, right? So in a way, it's about sort of elevating the brand and presenting them as a prestige brand and a luxury brand, and making sure that that continues. That's your job. Your job is not to push a price tag on a BMW, and your job is not to clear a lot. In
Yeah.
some ways it is, but that wasn't our job. I mean, that's the dealer's job. So, our job was to present the brand in the right way. So two very different, like two massive global brands, but with two very different reasons for doing business, at least with an agency like us.
The other one I wanted to ask you, and I don't want you to get sued, so be careful how you answer this, but
You
um,
can always bleep and edit.
a rumor I heard was that Apple left their previous agency because you left, and they went with you to your new home. Is there any truth in that?
Well, it's an interesting story. It's, and I'll tell the story and you can draw your own conclusions. So when I was at Huge, we at that time in Huge, we were on fire. We were getting like RFPs, 3 and 4 RFPs a week. It was insane. And the agency was doing really well. The reputation was really good. And we definitely had the reputation for being one of the better user experience design agencies out there, and at least sort of driving best practices in it. And RFP came in from Apple, and we didn't, Apple in Apple's way, and this will play out more in the story, they never really say what they're looking for or really say what they mean. It's Apple, right? They can do what they want and everybody falls at their feet, kind of thing, So there was an RFP came for Apple. I can't remember what the exact brief was for the pitch, but we did it. We went and pitched it in Cupertino and won. And at that point, you don't even know what you've won. It's like, you've won. And it's like, what? Like, what are we doing? And really what they were looking for, because it's Apple and they take security and security around their products so seriously, you can't work for Apple unless it's marketing, which is different because everything's out there already. But if you're working on product or you're working on the site design or anything like that, you have to do it on campus in Cupertino. And we didn't have an office in Cupertino. Nobody had an office in Cupertino apart from Apple. So it's like, so the what we actually won back then was to build a team internally at Apple to work on apple.com alongside the existing internal Apple team, because they have a small agency of their own in-house. So that all happened. We started, and then not long after I left and I joined Critical Mass. And, I heard stories in the background about Apple clients wondering where I was and why I hadn't showed up. And I guess the story came out that I'd left and moved on to another agency. Well, then about 2 weeks later, we got an RFP into Critical Mass for Apple. And it was kind of like, well, that's interesting. So at that point, this one I remember, the brief that they gave us then was, we think we do a lot of things well, but we also know there's certain things we don't do well. Pick one thing that we don't do well and tell us how we do it better. That was their brief, which was a great brief in a way, because as much as we all love Apple, there's definitely things that drive me nuts about Apple, like iTunes, which they've just killed, thank God. When things like that, they have things within the brand that are kind of legacy or old, and they've really focused on the iPhone and the laptop as like their main focus. They haven't really looked at software and everything else.
Yeah.
So we responded to the brief, and our basic premise was that me as a user of Apple, and I think at the time when we were doing the pitch, I counted the amount of Apple products I had, and I think I had 11. So between laptops and phones and Apple TV and everything else, I think I had 11 Apple products. And I was like, I would consider myself to be a fanboy of Apple. I've got 11 of your products, and I really get no benefit from owning all those products together. Like I own them all individually, but they don't really plug together very well. So we presented this whole idea called Better Together, which was promoting the Apple platform that should live across all devices. And then you get the benefits of passing content between them and everything else. So you got to remember, this was 5 years ago, 4.5 years ago. That's now become part of
iCloud,
who they are, and it's become a campaign, and it's like the passing. So that started a whole thing where, same thing, they were like, well, you can't work on anything unless you go to Cupertino. So we had to move some people out to Cupertino. So there I was out in Cupertino, and imagine this you will love. They have a building where all of the vendors sit. So it's like a big open studio where, you know, people who are working with Apple go into this studio space that's secured. So it's a closed network. It's got security doors, all that sort of, no windows. So people can't see into the screens and stuff. And one half of the building, or one half of the floor, was all my old Huge team. Oh. And the other half of the floor was all my new Critical Mass team. And over the period of about 2 years, one side got bigger.
Oh, no.
Side got smaller.
I was going to say, was it like, Anchorman news team battles?
It was bizarre. It was like the most bizarre, because I'd go in to see our team. It was important to spend some time out there when we were first setting it up. So I'd see people that I'd hired and worked with from Huge sitting like 4 rows up. So it was weird, you know. But then, you know, a couple of things happened. Huge at the same time also won work with Google. And you can't really work for Google and Apple.
Right.
It's like you can't work for Coke and Pepsi. You have to choose, you know. So Google became, I think it still is, maybe Huge's biggest account. And so they gradually were almost shifting away from Apple and growing a massive Google team, like 2 freeways over at Google's headquarters. And then our team was getting bigger and bigger. And I think the last count, the Critical Mass team in Apple was like up to like 90 people. And so we essentially built a small agency inside Apple at Cupertino that worked on apple.com and did all of the UX, all of the design, help with content creation, all that stuff for apple.com. That's really, we didn't touch campaign. We didn't touch social, they don't really do social media that much. But all the campaign work was still done by Mal down in Los Angeles. So we were really just doing the website and working on that.
But it must be hugely satisfying that, you know, hundreds of millions of people are using, you know, the things that you're designing and working on.
Yeah, the first week we were there, one of our designers brought that up. He was like, let's not fuck it up. It's like,
no pressure.
Because, you know, it already was a really good site experience before we got our hands on it. And, you know, the challenge was to keep it going and keep doing new things with it, and new ways of discovering a product was the big challenge. You know, so they'll bring out a new iPhone, or they'll bring out a new desktop computer, or they'll bring out a new screen. Like, how do you show it? Interestingly, one of the things that they weren't doing, like, the thing I love about Apple products is like the attention to detail in the products, like right down to like the screws in the phone.
Yeah.
Like they're like made of titanium and they're tiny, they're like beautifully done. But the site up to that point wasn't showing that amount of detail. Like you could see a picture of the product, but you couldn't like supersize it. So we did this whole thing about doing supersize galleries where you could go into like minute detail on products and really start to see the product blown apart, so you could play around with it and see it differently.
Like I love that. I think that's, you know, to me, that's a real good example of, you know, designing for a particular persona. Because you know, particularly with Apple, when you have that geek who just loves the technology and every nut and bolt of it, you know, and those exploded drawings and the way the parallax scrolling where the things are coming together. Like
Yeah.
that's it's right on the money for that audience. No doubt they're sitting at the moment looking at what obviously and we haven't talked about it much today, and partly because I think there's a lot of people who know more about it probably than definitely me who are talking lots about it, but we can't ignore it, I suppose. But companies like Apple will be sitting there going, well, how is this changing society, and what's next, who's going to play their part next, and how are people going to communicate and work. One of the things I wanted to ask you was, and it puts you on the spot slightly, but are there things that you can see now that where you think, creativity and design are going to play a part, whether it's customer experience or whatever, and or how do you see things playing out as we move forward based on what you've seen so far through the pandemic?
Well, an interesting thing about a year ago, there's a I guess he'd be a creative director now that I'd worked with for a long time, a guy called Ryan, and he was with me at Huge, and then eventually came and he ended up at Critical Mass and ended up working with me at Critical Mass. He's probably one of the most talented, what I would call like art director designers that I've worked with. Like everything he touched was just exactly how you want it to be without even playing around with it. He's just had that knack of doing it. So I always had like big respect for him and tried to sort of keep him as happy as possible, make sure he's getting paid right, make sure he's getting interesting projects, because he's the sort of guy that you build like agencies around, like, because the quality of work's really good. Yeah. He wasn't from New York. I think he was from somewhere like middle of the country, somewhere like Ohio or somewhere like that. He's like a bit of an outdoor guy, and him and his wife was the same. They were living up the Hudson River in New York, out of the city, and were commuting in every day because they couldn't bear to be in the city. So they kind of lived as close to the city as they'd have to be.
To make it practical.
Make it practical, but really, by all intents and purposes, their life was outside of the city. And they did that for a while, and they made it work. But I think after a while, he was kind of like, look, we're done with the city. I'm going to have to leave. And what he wanted to do was move to Colorado. He actually moved to Boulder in Colorado, which is like a really cool mountain town that has a little bit of culture going on in it. So they were going to move down there. And I was like, I got to keep this guy. I got to figure this out. So what I ended up doing was telling, look, you don't have to leave. You can work remotely. So you move to Boulder, take 6 months off, get in your camper van with your wife, drive to Colorado, find wherever you're going to live, set yourself up. And when you're ready, contact me again and we'll plug you back in and you can work remotely. Because in reality, I mean, we were an agency that had like over 10 offices, and it was very rare that a project had the whole team sitting around a bunch of tables in one office. We were essentially working across offices anyway. So you'd have people in Calgary working with people in London, people in New York, and working with people in Chicago. So we were used to the remote working thing and making it happen. Use Slack, use Zoom, use whatever. So that was nothing new. But then what we hadn't done was like have someone sit completely remotely by himself and plug into a team. So he was kind of the guinea pig for what in the end became what we were calling liquid talent, which was allowing people the ability to go live where they wanted to live, but still be part of the network and plug them in. So we were doing that like a year ago. Then this happened, right? So, and it's forced literally everyone in the company now to do it because everyone's working from home. No one's in the office. And people have figured it out. It's really just amplified what people were doing already, I think. The consequences for that, I think, are going to be massive. I think a lot of people, before this happened, were already questioning the value of living in the big cities and the quality of life of living in a big city. And do I need to be in the big city to do the work that I want to do? And I don't think you do anymore. I think you can live where you want to live. And through the power of all these tools we now have online, you can kind of plug into a team anywhere in the world. It doesn't even have to be in the US, it can be anywhere. And I fundamentally believe that anyway. And I think what I'm seeing now is a lot of people who are like questioning whether they want to be in somewhere like New York City. I mean, look, it's a shit show down there right now. It's horrible. And people are like scrambling to get out of it and trying to figure out, can they make their way of life work somewhere else? So I think that's a question a lot of people are going to start asking, like the value of being. I find it hard because, when I was in an office every day, I put huge value on the culture of an agency, or making the culture of an agency, like having people around you and building an agency culture, and getting drinks together and like doing stuff together and like building that sort of sense of team and culture. I put huge currency in that when I was in an office every day. Now
Yeah,
I'm not in an office every day. I question the value of it, and
yeah.
I don't know if that's me, like self-testing myself and making the story fit. I don't know, but now I look at it, I'm like, well, I can still have a sense of culture and connection without sitting 6 feet from someone. I
Yeah, I
think that.
suppose there's a. I suppose we're in a slightly unreal experiment at the minute because it's not. We know it's not going to be permanent, but at the same time, it's let the cat out of the bag. People know
Definitely
that
has.
people know what can be done. I suppose as our own agency is experiencing it, we can see that we can work, but we also are mindful that a lot of our customers can't, and that will be damaging to the business. So
Yeah,
I think somewhere along the line we'll get a balance. And I was
yeah,
writing a blog about it the other day, actually, as much for therapy as, as for anything. And
totally.
I think
Yeah,
the thought that occurred to me was that you know presenteeism isn't as much as we thought it was at work, but it's actually more than we thought it was at home.
yeah.
So
Oh,
I think
totally.
if we get a bit of balance on that, moving forward, that'll be a huge plus.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, maybe an agency where we're lucky in the respect that we can work like that, and maybe some of our customers can. But
Mhm.
um, I know you mentioned a few things there about uh, change of pace, different lifestyle. I know that's something that you've been looking at recently. What's the next moves for you? I know you're in your James Bond esque country retreat there in upstate New York.
James Bond building site right now.
Is
Um,
it
you know,
command the empire from there?
I think that for the first time, I mean, we mentioned right at the start of this, like I met the guy from Random House at my degree show. So I literally stopped college, and the next day I started a job, and then never stopped for 25, 28 years. And everything just kind of dovetailed together, and it just kept going and kept going and kept going. And I definitely reached a point, probably longer than a year ago, but in and around a year ago, I started to think about, okay, first of all, am I happy with the work that we're doing? And whilst we had, the likes of like Apple and BMW and Marriott and, other really great brands that we were doing really good work for, there was a lot of brands that we were doing work for that I didn't like, and I didn't really want to work for them either. So there was that. And I think the second thing was just the quality of life. I think we were both, my wife and I were kind of done with being in the big city, so
Yeah,
we already had this place, which is just 2 hours north of New York City. We were coming up here every weekend. I can still get to the city in an hour and a half. It's like getting on the train and going down to Dublin, for a day and doing meetings or whatever. I can still do that. So I'm trying to give myself a little bit of time to figure it out. But one thing, I think we've talked about this before, and I think it's probably going to happen maybe faster and more now with everything that's going on with the lockdown and the pandemic, is that a lot of companies, rather than sort of putting an agency on retainer, so the really big multi-million-dollar a year retainers that most agencies over here survive on, because
yeah,
it's the foundation that you build your agency on. There's fewer and fewer of those RFPs out there now, and I feel like what's happening is clients are starting to bring in that work in-house, and they're starting to build essentially internal agencies or internal teams to sort of manage that in-house. So that type of work, I feel that day-to-day running is being done more cost effectively by an in-house team. So then you have to really ask the question, what opportunity does that leave for agencies? And I feel like whilst those in-house teams are very good at managing the day-to-day brand, if a brand wants to do anything new or adventurous or innovation or strategy or test stuff, they've got no bandwidth. They've got zero bandwidth because their day job fills a 40-hour week for them. So I think there's an opportunity, and we saw this for these bigger brands to bring in a different type of agency to sort of fulfill that need, where you become more strategic, much more about prototyping and testing something
yeah.
new and different for them. So it might be a new business model, it might be a new product, might be a new experience, lots of different things. But I think to do that, you don't need the big, massive agency to do it. I think actually, if you did and you had all that overhead with you, it would kill the project, because these budgets come smaller, but they come more faster and furious along the way.
Yeah.
So I think an agency that can sort of react to that quicker and maybe do something that's a bit more nimble, smaller team, move quick, deliver a prototype, move on, I think is probably a really interesting opportunity, but I also think could be really cool work, because it's kind of future state, right? It's kind of what's next work, as opposed to the day-to-day maintenance of a brand. It's like, what's next for the brand?
A bit more experimental, push the boundaries that maybe someone who's slightly worn down by the day-to-day enforcement of the brand just can't think about anymore.
Fresh perspective, right? You need like another opinion to bounce stuff off and not bring all the baggage of your day-to-day job with you. And how does that agency then integrate with that internal team and hand that off to them? Because in the end, they're going to run it and manage it. So I think that opportunity is out there, and then the question is, how do you fulfill it, or how do you do it? And I think the whole idea of setting up an agency and carrying overhead and salaries and cost, especially now with everything that's happened with the pandemic, is like, why would you do that? It's like it's just scaling down what the bigger agencies are doing. It's like, look at it completely different. So I'm really interested in that sort of co-op model of like-minded people around the world that know each other, trust each other, and can work together, like coming together around certain projects, so that it's a little bit more gravity based. Like, this project needs these people, and this project needs these people.
Yeah.
I think that could be really interesting.
And the way that what's happening now is setting us up for that, because the airs and graces of normal business have kind of been, and you will probably regain some of them along the way, but no one's hung up on a Zoom call anymore, with how they look or how proper it is, or if someone walks across the background. Slack is almost, it's organic, it's part of your, so I think all those things are set up for that. And probably the only obstacle I could see in the way in terms of a collaborative approach to projects were old hang-ups that companies had about, we'd rather have one point of contact, or that sounds like
I can remember like clients, a few years back, wanting to come into the agency and like literally walk up and down the aisles and like see their team. This is what I'm paying for kind of attitude. I think it's a different generation of client that's coming through as well, that wants a little bit more control in-house. Because the other thing I'm finding is a lot of our clients now come from agency backgrounds. So in a weird way, they've left the agency side and gone brand side, and they know the mess that's on the agency side, and they don't want to deal with it. So they're building their own team in-house, and they'll bring an agency in when they absolutely need them. I think that's another trend I'm seeing over here. I don't know if it's the same everywhere, but I see it over here quite a lot. People going brand side.
We see it a little bit, but I think on what we see quite a bit, and I think what we'll see even more is that the one thing that we always used to want was a really nice office and environment, both for the team and also for bringing people in for pitches. And but more and more you'll see people coming in going, this is a big overhead, or is this going to be reflected in my invoice? Because it used to be something we would do with, as a smaller agency, when we're selecting partners to work with, we'll go and look at their site and look at their office and go, hang on, they look like they've got nicer place than we do. They're going to be, are we going to be paying for that in our invoice? So it's that cynicism.
No, totally. You've been in our office in New York. It's not the most amazing office in New York by any stretch of the imagination. I've been in Wainwright's office, but it's a nice office, and it's in Tribeca. And
in fairness, a postage stamp down there or a box down there costs you about $1 million.
Yeah, and we'd have people come in for pitches or meetings, and they'd be like, "Wow, you guys must be expensive." Based on the fact we're sitting in a Omnicom rented space in Tribeca. It's like, people's perception is driven by that. And I wondered off the back of the pandemic whether we were going to start to see like massive contract renegotiations for like, if like the agency surely can't charge the same rate if their overheads are cheaper. It's like,
and I think there's going to be an ethical fine line there, because some brands could come out and force that upon people. and you could put a lot of agencies under. You know,
Oh, totally. I don't know how long it will go on for. I mean, I think work. You've probably experienced more than I have over the last at least couple of months. Just the clients kind of pulling back a little bit just to see what happens because they're not sure. They're holding on to their budgets because they're like wait and see what happens. You know, that's obviously going to impact like how long can that go on before. I mean, you know, Ad Age and the Drum and everywhere else is full of people getting furloughed and laid off, and it's happening. It's starting to have an impact now over here where I feel like if it doesn't start to rev up again soon, like they're going to have to rethink contracts, rethink payment models, all sorts of stuff, because it's going to get to that point where the old model is like irrelevant, you know, from what they negotiated. Yeah, it's going to be. I'm really watching it and trying to figure out is there something there for a smaller, different type of group of people to work on something.
No, it sounds to me. It sounds like you're on the right tracks to me. I've kept you a long time today, but I wanted to finish up just by asking. We talked at the very start about starting out here in Northern Ireland as a young and optimistic designer looking out at the world. There's got to be hundreds of those today looking out on a probably slightly less optimistic view on the world. What advice would you be giving to that 20-year-old creative or designer out there as they set out?
I think it's if I look back now, I think that what worked for me, and I don't know if it'll work for everyone. I can't even say that this was a conscious decision, but anything that came along, I sort of had an open mind to it. You know, I didn't sort of go through art college and come out the other side and said, okay, I'm going to do that. Now I had friends at college that's absolutely what they were like. You know, I got friend Chris, he was like studied interior design and his goal was to have his own interior design studio. And he had that from year one in college. And that's what he's doing today, 30 years later. You know, and I had one friend, his like goal was to like work for an agency like Pentagram. And that's exactly what he's doing right now. He's working at Pentagram. I never had that. I sort of was very open. I went through most of college on a graphic design course, doing illustration, not really doing design. And when I came out, I thought I was going to be an illustrator and I ended up doing design. So it's like, in a weird way, I was just sort of staying open to stuff. And I'm definitely a dabbler. I like to dabble in things and like whatever it is, and try and figure stuff out. So that sort of open-mindedness really helped me make decisions about just try it. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, you can always leave and try something else. You know, it doesn't have to be this sort of defining step by step by step. I think giving yourself the ability to sort of go in and try something, and if it messes up or you fail at it, it doesn't matter, at least when you're young. I think when you get older, you get to a point where you have maybe more responsibilities and more commitment, and you can only second life or third life yourself so many times. You know what I mean? It's like taking risk when you get older is harder. But I think when you're right out of college and it's you and everything out there, I think take a few risks, go try stuff out. The other thing I thought made a big difference to me was travel, like getting out and seeing what's around. Because if we all travel as designers, like, you know, even when we're on holidays with our families and stuff, we're still designers. We're still looking for stuff. And, you know, travel to me was like getting out and seeing stuff made a big impact on me and big impression on me. So that sort of helped a lot as well. But probably the biggest thing was just being like not beating myself up if I tried something and it didn't work.
Yeah. No. You know?
Considering yourself a failure because you took a job and 6 months later you hated it. If you hate it, get out. Don't stick it out for 5 years because you'll really hate yourself at the end of the 5 years. You know, it's like
one of the things that I've noticed, you know, it's getting as I'm getting on, and you see different layers of young people coming through the team. You know, it's on the one hand, it's easy for me to say this as someone who helps run an agency, but you know, it's the people who aren't as focused as much on the salary, but more focused on the type of work they're doing. That you know, one comes, you know, it's you need to be patient, and obviously your circumstances, as you say, need to stack up. And if you've got responsibilities, you need to consider those. But if you get really good at something, inevitably the money will come along.
Well, yeah, I mean, that was we used to have I don't know who told me it. It might have been my old CEO from a long, long time ago. Was like, money follows great work doesn't follow money. So it's like, if you focus on the work, eventually it pays off. But if you chase the
In the same way that Apple followed you, in the same way that Apple.
see what happens. Sometimes it pays off, sometimes it doesn't. It's like, but I've always believed that. I think that eventually, if you're doing good work, you find the right clients, and then it happens. So I think that's the other thing I'm finding really interesting. I just watching generations of designers come through. Like, we used to be very pigeonholed in our skill sets and what we did. You had a developer was a developer, and they only did that. Designers just did design. Strategy was just done by strategists, and photography and film was just done by photographers and cinematographers. Now people are like cross role playing and all of those things, from especially from design to code. I think also from design to content creation, whether it be photography and film. I think sort of people that are able to sort of shape shift a little bit like that are finding like a really different type of role today than maybe me when I was coming up, because they're a lot more versatile and can try different things. I think that's invaluable to brands right now. I think being able to have people to think like that, I think is critical to sort of being really successful now.
Yeah. As I was mentioning to you earlier, my daughter was doing cutaways for me earlier on this piece, so we're going to try and experiment with editing this together later on.
Absolutely. That's great. Yeah, do it.
I'll be relying heavily on her skills from TikTok.
Yeah, we've been like here, we've been messing around with like music programs and all sorts of stuff, just like playing around with stuff because we got some time and we can. It's like it's cool. There's a program you can check out called Slate and Ash. It's like it's like a digital, I don't know what you would call it. It's like a digital mixing desk. It has like thousands of samples that you can just kind of play around with. It's fantastic. It's so much fun. You don't really need music knowledge to play. I've got a little bit. My wife has as well, but you don't really need musical knowledge to play around with it. You can just kind of play with it, just create stuff like soundscapes and stuff. It's really cool. It's really good.
Oh, we'll check it out. We need to schedule, and we've got plenty of nights to fill at the minute.
Yeah, exactly.
Conor, it's been a pleasure talking to you today. Thanks for giving up so much of your time.
It's cool. Yeah.
Really, really interesting. We could have gone on longer, but
I know we usually do this over here. So, in fact, I probably at this point I would have been in Belfast if everything hadn't happened.
I know, and that is the one thing. I think that hopefully in the not too distant future we'll be able to get on the road again and catch up physically. But once again, thanks for being our first guest on the Idea Society.
Stay safe, stay healthy.
Enjoy the rest of your time off there, and yeah, exactly. Same to you. Stay safe, and catch up soon.
Yeah, all the best.
Thanks a lot.
See ya.
I hope you enjoyed the first episode of the Idea Society. Keep an eye out for the next episode. Thanks very much.